Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the American Aboriginals. And I am so excited about this particular piece of research I'm going to show you because it will dispel a lot of myths and debunk some things about the African slave trade. And I want to do it in the context of the American Aboriginals because I know that there's been a great deal of pushback in the last few years about where we're from, who we are, all of that. And as you guys know, as a genealogist, I'm always going to turn to research. But here in this particular video, it's in addition to the research, I'm also going to show you real numbers here. Now, as you can see, the cover of the particular video is called The Book of the Indians. And I really want to draw your attention to that too, because there were so many tribes that existed here in North America prior to what we now know as the five civilized tribes, such as Cherokee and other tribes. So I just wanted to point that out to you. And I know that most people will say, well, some of those tribes don't exist anymore. And that is absolutely true, but I wanted to give you an idea as to the scope and range of the tribes that were here. And there were literally hundreds of them. And in this book, there were probably about 2,000 or more. So I just wanted to point that out to you before we dive in. So, as we start talking about this whole concept of the African slave trade, I want to give folks a little bit of education here because we keep talking about the continent of Africa, which is not even its indigenous or aboriginal name. And, forgive me if I'm messing it up, and there's lots of different ways to say it, but Al Kubalan is actually the actual indigenous name or the original name of what we now know as Africa. At least there's various names that the continent went by, but that is one of the translations, Al Kubalan. Again, forgive my accent, and it was translated as being the Garden of Eden or the Mother of Mankind. And as you guys know, Africa was named by the Romans and the Greeks, and that term really started to gain traction in the late 17th century. So, as we know, there's again, like I mentioned, there's many different names. The ancient name of Africa, and I want to really drive that home because when we repeat history, we are repeating history of the colonizer or the individuals who managed and I guess you could say took over history, so to speak. Now, as always, I'm always going to give you guys references so that you can go back and do your own individual research because that is so, so important to any narrative. And when you walk with this education, you won't ever have anybody tell you who you are again because you are walking with scientific evidence, archaeological evidence, all of those things pieced together. And one of the books that I love, really love, is called When the World Was Black: The Untold History of the World's First Civilizations. And this book is so detailed because it really shows you not only who the original peoples were, but how they came to be different than they are now. So it's a great book. And it basically says that we were, the dark skinned peoples of the world are and were aboriginal to this planet. So, right? So, of course, the intriguing question I have, if we know ourselves to be descendants of the dark skinned original peoples, how did everyone arrive to America before we did? I'm just going to let that sit with you for a minute because there's so many people that will say, oh, well, you had the First Nations here, you had the Native Americans here, they were the first peoples. And that's the narrative that people are going with. But again, if we are the original peoples of the planet, why were we not here first? Just think about that. If we birthed nations, why are we not here first in America before anybody else? It makes logically no sense, and there's also been archaeological and scientific evidence to prove that. But that's another story. But I just wanted to pose that question to you. So, but of course, okay, we're going to go with the narrative, right? So, history tells us that our African forefather and mothers were shipped to America via the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, and that is what we've been taught as quote unquote Black Americans since the dawn of time. And you go to school, you go to college, you hear that talked about incessantly. Our forefathers and mothers came to America via the transatlantic slave trade, i.e., from Alcubalan or Africa. Okay, so ta da! So, okay, I'm going to show you guys something here, and you may or may not be familiar with this particular website called Slave Voyages. And Slave Voyages is the authority, so to speak, on all of the slave ships that arrived across the continent and the world. And as you can see on the left here, from Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, Netherlands, USA, France, and Denmark, right? This is the authority of the slave ships. And, it's a pretty extensive page. It gives you their methodologies, all the supposed, records from those slave ships, everything you can imagine. So as you can see, in total, right here, down here, 12.5 million slaves, right? That's the number that we're always given. 12.5 million slaves were shipped across the world. Now, keep in mind, these are the ones who embarked, who left their countries to be slaves in other countries. Now, this particular slide says the ones who disembarked are the ones who survived, which is now 10.7, right? 10.7 million people. But I'm going to specifically talk about all of those slaves that came to America. Again, slave voyages across the world, 12.5 million. The ones who actually made it and disembarked were 10.7 million. But here we have America, USA, right? As you can see, again, the total numbers they have here from 1626 to 1875 were only 305,000 Africans that embarked, right? Okay. Now, the next slide will show you of those 305, 252 actually made it to this continent called North America, or this landmass called North America, right? So let that sit with you for a minute. When you think about the millions of slaves that were shipped everywhere, only 252,000 Africans, or I guess you can say slaves, because there's so many people being shipped everywhere, and they could have been from various parts of the country. But we'll go with the narrative that's been given to us. Okay, so again, you're seeing these numbers, 252. Just want to repeat that again. Now, I want to show you guys something really, really important. Between 1626 and 1800, 106,587 Africans made it to North America. Now, I want you to really look at that number, because I'm going to show you something that's really, really profound. And again, I come across a lot of research and some things I don't even look for in this particular this particular fact I wasn't looking for. But here it is. 106,000, right? Just to America, USA. Now, this is the first census of the United States, 1790. Now, as you guys recall, the British were actually, these were their colonies, and when the quote unquote Americans gained their freedom from Britain, they took their first census, and their first census was in 1790. Now, check this out. As you guys can see from this chart here, there were 694,280 slaves. Yeah, isn't that something? So we'll go back. Now, according to slave voyages, the authority on the transatlantic slave trade, only 106,000 and so Africans made it to North America. So, who were all these other slaves, right? So, if you got 106,000 African slaves, you had almost 600,000 slaves that were not African, according to the first census of the US. Now, yes, naturally, there are so many people that were living in the United States. They were all different nationalities or all different places. You could say they're Aboriginal, Indigenous. You could even say, you can even count the white slaves in there, right? But the thing is, the majority of the slaves that were counted in the census were not African. Let that sink in. And this is, again, their document. I'm not making this stuff up. Go look it up, right? So, and what's also very interesting about this is that in some cases, the slaves outnumbered the free white males that were 16 years or older, that also included heads of households. Okay. So that's so amazing and intriguing to me, because if you're doing all this shipping people back and forth to your country, they're outnumbering you. Yeah, I mean, think about the logic of that. And I'll just let that sit. I'm not going to get into the opinions about that. I'm just presenting the facts right now and the numbers in front of you so that you can see them for yourself. So again, like you can see with Virginia, Virginia is like, there's like almost 300,000 slaves compared to 110,000 free white men. Same in South Carolina, Maryland, North Carolina, Georgia. And in some cases, like in Kentucky and Delaware, the slaves were almost equal to the number of free white men. Just let that sink in, you guys. Really, really let that sink in, right? So I say all of this to say, come to the point. Start with your genealogy and obtain your family's records, because that is where you're going to see your own family story. That is really the thing, because if we're talking about the majority of people in 1790 not being of African quote unquote descent, then who were they? Who were the rest of these people? Yes, you can say they're the quote unquote white slaves. But I will do another video to really talk about that too, because that's a whole nother dynamic. But in any case, start with your genealogy. And this is the foundation for you. And all of the documents are legal evidence. So that's another thing too, that you get into as a quote unquote Black American or African American. Because as you can see from the information presented today, there was a whole lot of Aboriginal folks that were here, and they were not from Africa, at least from the continent of Africa, and in the context of the African slave trade, as has been taught to us. As always, here are some books to start you on your journey, and you could really read and understand the dynamics of what was happening with various tribes and, admixtures of people. These are just some books that I've read that are quite fascinating, that gives you context to things so that you're not just reading it from, oh, I'm African. Okay. So that's it for today. I just wanted to put that bug in your ear, let you guys see that research. And this is, again, research that I pulled up that's been documented. It's from bona fide sources. So again, as you can see, when it comes to the teaching of quote unquote Black history and this whole narrative about you are the descendant of Africans, okay, that's true, right? To a degree. But you also want to be very, very mindful that there is that Aboriginal Indigenous side to yourself that you're completely ignoring. And there's evidence now, it's coming out every day, that we are in the majority, right? So, in any case, go ahead and take that information in and tell me what you feel or think in the comments. And yeah, so talk to you guys soon. Please like and share this video, and we'll be talking soon.